In rooms dripping with crystal and old money, people rarely insult you just for a chair. They do it to prove they control the spotlight. That night, Preston Albright wanted to flaunt his power by snatching my VIP seat for his girlfriend. He dragged me up, completely unaware. I held the final signature for their $2.3 billion investment. As I adjusted my sleeve, nobody realized I was about to cancel their entire financial future. My name is Vance Harrington. I am 48 years old, and on this particular evening, I was the only person in the room who truly understood the gravity of the air we were breathing. The Lake Briar Pavilion in Chicago was designed to make people feel either important or insignificant. Tonight, it was the battleground for Solomon Vector Systems, an infrastructure technology firm celebrating the closing night of the most massive transaction in their corporate history. The room smelled of expensive orchids and vintage champagne. I wore a minimalist charcoal suit, no luxury brand logos stamped across my folder, no assistant trailing behind me. I walked with the steady, unhurried pace of someone who did not need to be noticed. When I reached table 1, the undisputed center of gravity for the gala, I found the heavy, gold-rimmed place card that read Vance Harrington. It was positioned flawlessly, the absolute best sightline to the podium. I pulled out the chair and sat down. The polite hum of conversation among the high-level executives faltered for a fraction of a second. Across from me, a senior partner from a secondary law firm adjusted his silk tie and offered a tight, forced smile. To his left, a managing director let his eyes flick over my unadorned suit before returning to his drink. They assumed I was junior counsel, perhaps a senior compliance officer who had been granted a pity invite, or high-level event staff who had misread the seating chart. In their minds, men who looked like me, who dressed with such severe practicality and sat completely alone, did not belong at table 1. I simply picked up my water glass and listened. The men to my right were locked in a discussion about pre-money valuations and convertible debt triggers. The advisory director was loudly explaining the disbursement conditions of the capital injection, aggressively misinterpreting the liquidity covenants. He spoke with the blind confidence of a man who had only read the executive summary. I took a slow sip of ice water. I knew those covenants. I had drafted the penalty clauses. I understood the mechanics of the mezzanine tranches, the debt service coverage ratios, and the exact legal triggers that could freeze the funds faster than anyone else. They were throwing around buzzwords, but I held the keys to a kingdom worth billions of dollars. Then Preston Albright stepped into the light, radiating the unearned arrogance of a chief executive officer's son. Gerald Albright, the founder of the company, had spent decades building Solomon Vector Systems, but Preston walked as though he had laid every brick himself. Clinging to his arm was Bianca Thornton, a lifestyle influencer desperately attempting to pivot to high society prestige. Preston guided her toward table 1. His eyes swept over the arrangement, doing the silent math of status and positioning. His gaze landed on the chair I was currently occupying, the prime seat facing the stage, perfectly angled for the photographers. His jaw tightened. He leaned down and whispered something to Bianca. She offered a small, knowing pout, and Preston straightened his jacket, stepped around the back of the table, and stopped directly behind my shoulder. "Excuse me," Preston said. His voice was smooth but layered with entitlement. "You are in the wrong seat." I did not immediately turn around. I placed my water glass back onto the tablecloth, aligning it perfectly with the plate. Then I looked up at him. "I assure you," I said, my voice flat, "I am exactly where I am supposed to be." Preston let out a sharp chuckle. He tapped a manicured finger against the back of the empty chair next to me. "Look, I do not know who told you to sit here. Maybe the event planners got confused, but I specifically reserved this exact sightline for Bianca. It is the only seat that works for the lighting." Bianca stepped forward, placing a hand on Preston's forearm. She looked down at me with a smile crafted to convey polite disdain. "It is totally fine, Preston," Bianca purred. "I am sure he just got a little turned around. The executive section can be confusing if you are not used to these plans." She looked at me, her eyes devoid of warmth. There is usually a designated area for support staff near the kitchen doors. The conversation at our table had completely died. The lawyers, the advisors, and the bankers were now openly watching. I looked at the heavy gold-rimmed place card. "My name is Vance Harrington. This is my assigned seat. Preston's face flushed. He was not used to being told no, especially not in front of an audience, and certainly not by a man he had already categorized as insignificant. Listen to me very carefully, Preston said, his tone dropping. I do not care what that cardboard says. I am Preston Albright. My father is hosting this entire evening. Someone like you clearly does not understand how these events operate. You do not just claim a prime seat because a temp agency misspelled a name tag. Now you are going to stand up, vacate this chair, and find wherever it is you actually belong before I lose my patience. I remained completely still. I did not flush. I let the stretch, heavy and suffocating. I will not be moving, I said. My voice did not rise. It cut through the jazz music with the precision of a scalpel. If you have an issue with the seating arrangement, I suggest you take it up with the organizers, but I am staying right here. Bianca gasped softly, a theatrical display of shock. Preston's hands balled into fists. He pointed a finger directly at my face. You brought this on yourself. He turned his back on me and flagged down a passing event manager. Get security over here right now. We have an uninvited guest who is refusing to leave the VIP section. Preston turned back to me, a smug smile plastered across his face. He had no idea that he had just handed a lit match to the only person in the room holding the keys to the armory. The two security guards marched over, dark suits and earpieces in place. In their eyes, Preston was the untouchable prince, the flesh and blood of the man whose name was on their paychecks. I was merely a solitary man causing a disturbance. The taller guard stepped forward. Sir, the guard said, his voice a low rumble, I am going to have to ask you to vacate this area. We can discuss ticketing issues in the lobby. Around us, the polite murmurs of the gala had evaporated. Hundreds of guests were now silent, their attention fixed on table 1. In my peripheral vision, I saw the glow of smartphone screens. People were recording. The elite of Chicago's financial sector could not resist the allure of a public humiliation. Preston stood with his arms crossed, a monument to unearned victory. Bianca pressed herself against his side, looking at me with performative pity. The guard glanced at Preston, who gave a single sharp nod. The guard stepped closer, reached out, and wrapped his thick fingers around my upper arm. The grip was firm enough to be an undeniable physical command. He was attempting to lift me out of the chair by force. A collective intake of breath swept through the surrounding tables. A physical altercation at the gala was unthinkable. I did not shout. I did not pull away. I simply stood up, allowing the momentum of his grip to pull me to my feet. The moment I was standing, I turned my head and fixed my eyes on the guard. My expression did not shift, but the temperature in my gaze dropped to absolute zero. He released my arm instantly, stepping back as if he had touched a live wire. I raised my left hand and slowly, deliberately, smoothed out the fabric of my sleeve where the guard had grabbed me. I adjusted the cuff, ensuring the line of the sleeve was perfectly straight. Only then did I turn my attention to Preston. He was grinning. You, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying with perfect clarity through the silence. You just lost your father's company a lot of money. Preston let out a sharp, mocking laugh. Right, sure I did. Security, please escort this man out before he starts making any more ridiculous threats. Bianca giggled, a bright chiming sound. Honestly, she whispered loudly, the entitlement of some people is just wild. They were so thoroughly insulated by their own arrogance that they did not hear the frantic sound of footsteps. Clara Montgomery, the general counsel of Solomon Vector, and Julian Reynolds, the director of investor relations, shoved their way through the crowd. Clara looked as though she had been running. Julian was entirely pale, his eyes wide and panicked. The event staff had clearly radioed them about a disturbance, and they had come to sweep the mess under the rug. Julian arrived first, breathing heavily. He looked at Preston, then at the security guards, and finally, his gaze dropped to the empty chair and the place card. He read the letters. I watched the blood drain from Julian Reynolds' face. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with terror. Oh my God, Julian choked out. Mr. Harrington Vance, Clara Montgomery stepped up beside him, her sharp eyes scanning the scene. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She actually swayed on her feet, grabbing the back of a chair to steady herself. Julian, Preston said, his tone dripping with condescension, tell your security team to finish taking out the trash. We have a dinner to start. Julian did not look at Preston. He turned to the entire VIP section, his voice suddenly loud and desperate. "Stand down," Julian screamed at the guards. "Back away from him right now." The guards froze. Preston frowned, his smirk faltering. "Julian, what are you doing?" He was in Bianca's seat. "That is her seat." Julian shouted, his voice cracking. "Everyone, please. This is a massive misunderstanding. Please allow me to introduce Vance Harrington." Julian paused, swallowing hard. "Vance Harrington is the managing director of closing integrity at Ridgeback Capital Partners," Julian announced, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "He is the sole signatory authority holding the final approval for our $2.3 billion anchor investment." The words hit the room like a shockwave. The mood in the room changed instantly. The soft glow of the smartphones that had been recording the scene suddenly vanished. The bankers and lawyers who had been sneering at me minutes ago were now staring at Preston with expressions of pure, unadulterated horror. They were looking at him as a walking liability. The air was thick with the scent of absolute panic. Preston's face went entirely slack. His eyes darted from Julian to Clara and then slowly to me. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Bianca dropped her phone. She took a slow step away from Preston, her survival instincts overriding her performative devotion. She realized instantly that the man she was clinging to was an anchor tied to a sinking ship. Gerald Albright strode into the ballroom. He wore a custom tuxedo and a charismatic smile, ready to toast to his legacy. He walked confidently toward table 1. All right, let us settle down," Gerald boomed. "What seems to be the trouble here tonight?" Gerald stopped walking. His smile remained frozen as his eyes processed the scene. The security guards standing away from me. Clara gripping a chair like a lifeline. Julian looking as though he were about to weep, and Preston staring in terror. Finally, Gerald's eyes met mine. I stood perfectly still, my expression blank. In the span of 3 seconds, the chief executive officer watched his entire life's work balanced precariously on the edge of a cliff. Gerald Albright realized that his son had just handed me the match, the gasoline, and the right to burn his empire to the ground. Within 30 seconds of grasping the catastrophe, Gerald had mobilized a discreet extraction. He guided our small group away from the staring crowd. We slipped into a soundproof private reception suite tucked behind the main stage. The heavy oak door clicked shut, severing the noise. Inside, the room was staged with dark leather armchairs and crystal decanters. Clara Montgomery and Julian Reynolds followed us in, their faces tight with anxiety. A moment later, "The door," admitted Miles Sinclair, the chief financial officer of Solomon Vector. Miles possessed the permanent exhaustion of a man who spent his life mitigating other people's risks. He looked at Gerald, then at me, immediately sensing the drop in the room's temperature. "Mr. Harrington," Gerald began, his voice a baritone dripping with manufactured warmth. "I cannot express how sorry I am for this ridiculous disruption. My son acted with inexcusable immaturity. It was a seating mix-up. Please sit down, let me get you a glass of water, and we can reset this entire evening." I did not sit down. I bypassed the emotional pleasantries entirely. Instead, I looked directly at Clara Montgomery. "Is the ballroom feed currently live?" I asked. The question hung in the air, cold and devoid of the emotional response Gerald had anticipated. I was establishing the exact perimeter of the legal and financial damage. Gerald blinked, his host persona faltering. Clara stepped forward. "The internal cameras are rolling for archival purposes," she said cautiously. "That is not what I asked," I replied. "Is the feed currently broadcasting to the syndicate, the mezzanine lenders in New York, the sovereign wealth representatives in Singapore?" Miles Sinclair's shoulders dropped. He closed his eyes. "Yes," Clara admitted. "A live feed is going out to the remote partners." I unclasped the minimalist leather portfolio I had carried with me. I pulled out a single sheet of paper and laid it flat on the glass coffee table, tapping my index finger against a specific paragraph. "Section 7, Article 4 of our master agreement," I said, my tone as clinical as a surgeon reading a chart. "Ridgeback Capital Partners reserves the absolute right to halt all capital disbursement immediately if any executive, board member, or representative affiliated with the leadership team engages in conduct that poses a material reputational risk during the final closing period." Gerald let out a forced, dismissive sigh. "Vance, please. Let us be reasonable here. Preston does not hold an official title at Solomon Vector. He is an overly eager young man who made a social blunder. He is not a designated representative. Do not insult my intelligence, Gerald, I countered seamlessly. For the past 8 months, you have paraded Preston through road shows. You sat him at the table during structuring meetings. You introduced him as the successor. You cannot market him to the banking world to secure our $2.3 billion and then instantly reclassify him as an unaffiliated civilian the moment he orders corporate security to remove your lead investor. Clara flinched. He is right, Gerald. Miles Sinclair interjected, his voice trembling. This is not about a chair. This is a massive governance nightmare. If the syndicate partners saw an unauthorized family member command our security staff to physically enforce his personal whims, it demonstrates a complete failure of our internal controls. Miles looked at me, a silent plea in his eyes. Preston had just broadcasted extreme systemic instability to the very people holding the purse strings. I turned my attention back to the chief executive officer. As the managing director of Closing Integrity, my signature is not a rubber stamp. It is the final mechanism that releases the escrow. My sole mandate is to certify that the governance structure we invested in on paper is the governance structure operating in reality. Tonight, I witnessed a shadow hierarchy operating completely outside your legal framework. That is a material breach. Gerald's face seemed to age 10 years. He pressed his hands flat against the glass table, leaning forward in desperation. Give me until tomorrow morning, Gerald pleaded. Do not trigger the red flag tonight. Let me handle this internally. I will strip him of all access. Just give me 12 hours to fix my house before you burn it down. I tucked the document back into my portfolio. I am not giving you an ultimatum, Gerald, I said. I am simply doing my job. I walked out of the Lake Briar Pavilion and into the biting chill of the Chicago night. The moment I was seated inside the quiet cabin of my vehicle, I engaged the encrypted line on my phone and dialed New York. Lawrence Thorne answered on the second ring. We are halting the disbursement, I replied, my voice entirely flat. Gerald Albright's son just used corporate security to physically attempt my removal in front of the entire syndication network. I laid out the sequence of events with surgical precision. The timeline, the witnesses, and the presence of the live camera feed. Lawrence did not express outrage. Does it cleanly trigger the reputational risk clause? It is a textbook execution of Section 7, Article 4, I stated. But Lawrence, an unhinged heir. Throwing a tantrum is a symptom, not the disease. If the son has the functional authority to commandeer the general counsel and the investor relations director in public, the governance structure we underwrote is a fiction. We need to open the vault tonight. Do it, Lawrence ordered. Get the risk team online. I want every single piece of paper turned inside out by dawn. Within 45 minutes, my hotel suite had transformed into a digital war room. At 2 o'clock in the morning, Gavin Mercer broke the silence. He had been digging through the strategic communications budget. I think I found the leak, Gavin said, his voice tight. They requested a late-stage allocation of $1,500,000 for an undisclosed lifestyle partner activation. The proposal did not name the partner, but the required demographic reach and platform engagement rates matched a very specific tier of online celebrity. Cross-reference the requirements with Bianca Thornton's public metrics, I instructed. 5 minutes later, Gavin came back. It is a 100% match. They built a $1,500,000 corporate marketing budget custom-tailored to fit Preston Albright's girlfriend. The entire narrative of the evening suddenly shifted. Bianca Thornton was not just an entitled girlfriend. She was a hidden liability. The Albright family was siphoning corporate funds into a vanity project to elevate her social status, bypassing the board of directors. Preston had not been defending his girlfriend's honor. He had been aggressively guarding his incoming corporate asset. This was a story about misappropriation of funds and a failure of fiduciary duty. Expand the search parameters immediately, I ordered. Pull the flight logs for the corporate jet and the credit card statements. At 3:15, the legal team flagged heavily redacted emails. At 4:30, we found a shell vendor contract aligned with Bianca's management agency. Every stone we overturned revealed a deeper layer of rot. The puzzle was complete. We had the proof that Solomon Vector Systems was a piggy bank for the founder's lineage. Lawrence joined the video bridge at 6 o'clock sharp. We shift the entire transaction into red review status immediately, I declared. We freeze the escrow accounts. We notify the lead syndicates that a material governance discrepancy has triggered an emergency audit. When Gerald Albright walks into his office this morning, he is going to find his $2.3 billion lifeline locked behind a steel door by Tuesday afternoon. Gerald Albright pivoted to character assassination. A crisis management firm deployed a coordinated smear campaign across industry blogs. I was painted as an overzealous administrative clerk, throwing a bureaucratic tantrum. They leaked a photograph taken 18 months prior during a due diligence tour. In the image, I was wearing a safety helmet and a reflective vest. The caption read, "Event staff confusion, understandable given the demeanor of the Ridgeback compliance auditor." They wanted the market to believe that anyone would have mistaken me for a shift supervisor who had wandered into the wrong room. Lawrence Thorne called me just after lunch, offering to have our public relations team issue a statement. "We do not respond to gossip," I told him. "Let them play in the mud." I am staying in the archives. At exactly 4 o'clock, my secure messaging line flashed with an incoming call from Evelyn Davenport, the vice chair of the Solomon Vector Board of Directors. "Mr. Harrington," Evelyn said, "I spent the last 24 hours ripping apart the executive suite. Gerald swore to the board that the slide deck regarding Preston's new position was a rogue draft. I am transmitting a file to your secure server right now. It is the unredacted minutes from a closed executive board session we held 6 months ago. I explicitly challenged Gerald on Preston's visibility in the company. I demanded assurances that his son would not be utilized in any capacity." I opened the file. Gerald Albright was on the official corporate record, stating unequivocally that Preston would hold zero operational authority. "He lied to the board. He committed intentional misrepresentation," Evelyn corrected. "He used our credibility to secure your $2.3 billion, and he planned to spring Preston on us the moment the ink was dry." "There is something else, Vance," Evelyn continued. "Solomon Vector has a logistics subsidiary in Detroit. They have a massive balloon debt payment maturing in exactly 19 days. Gerald kept it off the primary consolidated balance sheet by routing it through holding companies. He needs the anchor funds to plug the hole. If we miss that payment, the gross default provisions will trigger across our entire corporate debt structure. The company will be insolvent within a month. The Detroit logistics subsidiary employed over 4,000 blue-collar workers. If I killed the deal, those 4,000 people would lose their livelihoods just weeks before the winter holidays. But if I allowed the $2.3 billion to flow, I would be legally endorsing a fraudulent regime. Only you can decide what happens next," Evelyn said. "Gerald Albright called me late on Friday evening. Surrendering, he offered a comprehensive governance reform package. Preston would be removed from all corporate activities. The $1,500,000 marketing contract with Bianca Thornton would be terminated, and he would issue a full public apology. "I just need you to unlock the escrow accounts," Gerald pleaded. "We need the money to clear the debt maturity in Detroit." I ended the call and dialed Lawrence Thorne. "We accept the public apology," Lawrence decided. "We delay the disbursement by 30 days to enforce the compliance changes. We save the yield, and we keep the company from going under." It was a clean win. The 4,000 blue-collar workers in Detroit were going to keep their jobs. Then my secure inbox chimed. Clara Montgomery had sent a file. It was an official internal incident report, drafted by the head of security. The report falsely claimed that I became hostile in the designated executive seating area, exhibited erratic behavior, and that security personnel initiated standard physical de-escalation protocols. They were actively constructing a fabricated paper trail to legally invalidate my reaction. Clara had also attached the raw digital server logs. The fabricated, aggressive revision had been manually saved into the system at exactly 4:15 today, edited immediately following a meeting between Gerald and the crisis public relations team. Gerald had called my phone to offer an apology at exactly 4:45. The realization hit me. The apology was a calculated theatrical stall tactic. He was speaking softly to my face, begging for mercy. While his hands were busy forging the knife he fully intended to bury in my back the moment the funds were secured. The agonizing moral dilemma regarding the 4,000 logistics workers completely vanished. Under corporate law and the standard doctrines of contract enforceability, a document created through active fraud and forgery is void ab initio, meaning it has no legal standing from the beginning. California Penal Code Section 470 outlines the exact nature of this offense, and the federal implications of executing wire fraud based on forged compliance documentation were staggering. I picked up my phone and emailed Gerald's assistant, copying Evelyn Davenport and the board. I confirmed that I would attend the emergency board session scheduled for Monday morning in person. The boardroom on the top floor of the Solomon Vector building was encased entirely in glass. Every seat was occupied. Gerald Albright sat at the head of the table. Preston sat rigidly to his right, radiating fear and defiance. Bianca Thornton sat slightly behind him, her arms crossed. I sat directly opposite Gerald. I stood up and opened my leather portfolio. "We are not here to debate etiquette," I began. "I am going to provide a precise chronological record of the events that have jeopardized this $2.3 billion syndication." I distributed copies of my dossier. "I am halting this transaction because of the three-layer structure of deception: the public execution of unauthorized executive power, the undisclosed post-closing strategy to embed that family member in an investor relations role, and the active premeditated falsification of security records." Gerald leaned forward. "The allegation regarding the security report is an administrative error," he claimed. "Please turn to page 42 in your packets," I instructed the room. "What you are looking at is an email from the chief executive officer's private outbox, sent to the head of security exactly 17 minutes after your conference call on Saturday afternoon. The body of your email instructs him to," and I quote, "rewrite the narrative to establish the Ridgeback representative as the hostile party, or we lose our legal leverage against the withdrawal." End quote. Gerald's voice failed him. The firewall had collapsed. Preston slammed both hands down onto the table. "This is completely insane," Preston shouted. "You are tearing apart a multi-billion-dollar company just because of your own massive ego. You got your feelings hurt over a chair. Just because one man likes to be respected too much, everyone in this room goes crazy." Bianca stood up, her voice shrill. "You are all acting like total hypocrites," Bianca cried out. "You sit here judging Preston, but you all knew about the strategy. Your own marketing department literally sent me the brand sponsorship proposal deck 3 weeks ago. They promised me the front row seat because I was the face of the new expansion." A collective gasp was drawn by the legal team. Bianca Thornton had just driven the final nail into the coffin. She had accidentally confessed to receiving advanced, unapproved corporate materials, proving that the undisclosed related party transaction was an active, executed promise. Evelyn Davenport slowly stood up. "Gerald," Evelyn said, "did you intentionally conceal material facts from this board of directors?" Gerald looked at her, his eyes hollow. He had no lies left. The lead partner from the New York Mezzanine Lending Syndicate cleared his throat. "Mr. Harrington, is Ridgeback Capital Partners still leaving the door open for a path forward, or are you formally withdrawing the anchor funds?" Every eye in the glass room turned to me. I looked down at the dossier. I closed the cover. "I require exactly 1 minute of silence," I said softly. I stood up from the walnut table. I directed my gaze entirely to Evelyn Davenport and the board. "I want to make one thing absolutely clear," I stated. "I am not killing this syndication over a chair. I am terminating this transaction because that single chair inadvertently kicked open the door to a systemic, meticulously engineered labyrinth of corporate fraud. In my capacity as the managing director of Closing Integrity, I am officially executing our right to withdraw the entire $2.3 billion anchor commitment. This decision is effective immediately. The escrow accounts will be permanently locked and dissolved by the end of the business day. Furthermore, I recommend that the co-investment funds and the lending syndicates immediately suspend all disbursements and initiate fraud investigations." The reaction was a synchronized implosion of corporate wealth. "On behalf of the mezzanine syndicate, our credit verification is frozen," the lead partner announced. We are pulling our term sheets. A representative from the Sovereign Wealth Fund, seated at the far end of the table, instantly mirrored the action. The complex financing structure collapsed into dust in less than 90 seconds. Without the anchor money, the secondary loans defaulted. Without the loans, the entire corporate balance sheet turned toxic, triggering the collapse of the Detroit Logistics subsidiary and sealing the fate of the empire. Because Gerald had hidden the Midwest supply chain liability and was planning a sudden shuttering of the Detroit facilities to cover his tracks, he had also run afoul of the Warner Act under 29 U.S. Code Section 2101, which would have triggered millions of dollars in statutory penalties. Gerald slumped backward. Evelyn Davenport commanded, "Gerald, you are hereby suspended from your duties as Chief Executive Officer, effective this exact second. You are to surrender your credentials." She turned toward Preston. "And you? You are stripped of every title and access. Corporate security will escort you both out immediately. Clara, I want an independent investigation opened by noon." Bianca Thornton quietly stood up and completely vanished. She deleted her social media accounts before the sun even set. Preston Albright became an instant cautionary tale, a universal laughingstock on Wall Street. I did not stay to watch them pack. I walked out of the Solomon Vector headquarters and stepped into the wind of the Chicago morning. I headed directly back to the Ridgeback Capital Regional Office. There was no champagne, no celebratory applause. In this world, you simply survive it and move on. I walked into my office, hung my coat, and sat down at my desk. I pulled the Solomon Vector file, placed it in the secure shredding bin, and opened the next folder. Decisions involving billions of dollars must always be executed with a cold, mechanical head, never a hot, vengeful heart. In business, the only currency that truly decides your place in the room is respect. Because when the final hour strikes, the person who is aggressively deemed not to belong at that table is often the exact same person who holds the power to pick up the entire table and throw it completely out of the room.